Hey everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold here with our weekly lecture series, Great Players of the Past and sometimes present, sometimes both. It depends if it's like a Christmas story or not. But anyway, this is Yasser Seirawan. We did part one last week. That video is already on our YouTube page and has many thousands of views. And this is part two. It's like Naked Gun, but this is more funny. So Yasser played chess in 5 decades, the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. And in each decade, he beat world-class players. And I don't think in the 2020s he's played an official rated game, but I could be wrong. I mean, he could. He just, he's probably plays Blitz for fun. Okay, so this game was played in 1975, and supposedly, the first rated tournament Yasser ever played in, he was 12 years old, which is pretty old for somebody to become a super GM. And this tournament was played when he was 15, and it was a US championship qualifier. So he'd only been playing tournaments for 3 years, and he was already like really good. And I know when he was playing in the US Open in Lincoln, Nebraska, which I believe was 1975. I didn't play chess then, but I know when the US Opens were. He was there, and people were wondering, they were like, wow, look how strong that girl is. Yasser had very long curly hair, and most people thought he was a girl when he was between 12 and 16. And he would still beat them, and they just thought they lost to a girl. Now, if you lose to a girl, that's expected. But in 1976, losing to a 15-year-old girl was unusual in the US. Okay, now it's now 13, 12, 10, 6, 5, 3, 2. That's normal. Okay, so Yasser has white against somebody who's played in 1 billion US championships, Arthur Bisguier. And Yasser has the white pieces. And the purpose of this lecture, lecture 2, is we're going to look at his great endgames. And in this particular instance, which is very unusual for me, I've never seen any of these games. And the reason is Yasser's played thousands and thousands and thousands of games. So I've only seen like maybe 10% of them. So I haven't seen most of Yasser's games. And especially when he was 15 years old, I haven't seen any of those games. Okay, so he's white against Arthur Bisguier, and you will know Yasser is the Lord when Yasser plays the move. Oh, Queen A5 was played, attacking Yasser's rook. And you will know his name is the Lord when he plays Rook E5. That's what you were going to play, but you forgot. Now this is funny because this is an endgame lecture, and Black's getting checkmated. Except Black's not getting checkmated. Because, grandmasters are pretty good. And Bisguier, for the first time I've ever said this, I'll never say it again, Bisguier was not old. The first time I saw Bisguier, he was old. And the 1000th time I saw Bisguier, he was old. He was always old. But not in 1975. Okay, 1975, he wasn't in his prime, but he wasn't far from his prime. He's good in the 70s. Okay, so the obvious idea is to do interference. If you take the rook, Yasser plays checkmate. And as you all know, when you have opposite colored bishops, that leads to more checkmates in the middle game because the other bishop can't defend. Black is weak on the dark squares, and these pieces do not defend the dark squares. So Queen G5 mate is a serious threat. Okay. Bisguier played Rook B1 check. Yasser saw he was in check and played King G2. And now he played the only move to not get mated or lose his queen. Queen takes the rook, and he gets a rook and bishop for a queen. And you would think white must be better. White has a queen for a rook and a bishop. But Bisguier is an older, experienced GM, and Yasser's 15. So maybe Yasser doesn't play the endgame so well. Maybe Bisguier can hold. Okay, and now we'll see the beautiful technique that Yasser's always had, even before he played chess. It's hard to understand. Okay, so he played queen e4 check, which is a fork. It forks everything. This and this and this. It's a lot of forking. Now the e pawn's pretty important because that defends the d pawn. So he defended his e pawn, king f6. And Yasser played f4, ignoring the h pawn. He said, I don't care about the h pawn, I care about this center being destroyed. So he played f4, now black is going to lose his whole center. Truth hurts. Rook check. Yasser always repeats. Even when Yasser was 15, he was repeating, although he didn't repeat yet. Okay, so he moves his king on down, which is actually a theme of this lecture. Getting checked and moving your king across. Not sure how that's possible. Okay, Bisguier took, check, takes the d pawn. And now in this position, because Yasser played f4 and ignored the h pawn on h7, white has two connected passed pawns. So rook b6, stopping the pawns. Rook a6, c6. Now if you take the pawn, Yasser plays queen e4 check and wins the rook. So that didn't work very well. Okay, so he takes the pawn on a3, and Bisguier's trying to get an endgame where he has a rook against a queen, but maybe he can get a fortress. And Magnus Carlsen, in 1975, not being born for many years to come, probably like 15 years, said, I don't believe in fortresses. And because of that, he was later born. Okay, that actually makes some sense, okay, as long as you don't think too much about it. Okay, c7, rook a2 check, and rook c6, rook a6. The bishop is stopping the pawn, and the rook wants to go here, winning the pawn, and black has a lot of extra pawns over here, so white's not going to promote this pawn. Yasser played queen e4 check, stopping rook c6, then played queen takes bishop, so he could promote his pawn. And probably, if I was a betting man, I'm not even going to be a betting man. I'm going to state it outright. And then if I'm wrong, people are going to say, I used my table bases and you're wrong. Yeah, I'm not wrong. If this pawn is gone on d3, this is a draw. And it's a draw without these pawns. And I believe it's a draw without either one of these pawns. You just need one of them. Because this pawn, that pawn don't win. Black plays rook g6 and turns on Netflix. Okay, because he's going to chill. Okay, however, Yasser does have a passed d pawn, so this is a pretty easy win. Rook e3, the d pawn's the important one. He defends it. Now, if you take on g3 to get counterplay, queen e5 check, which was the same trick before with queen e4 check. Same trick. So after queen f5, Bisguier resigned because he can't take this pawn, he can't take this pawn. Queen g5 is a threat, king d2 is coming, and the d pawn is queening. So a nice easy endgame win for a 15-year-old against one of the greats of America. Bisguier, one of the top 10 Americans of all time before 1980. After 1980, then I refuse to answer on the grounds that it'll incriminate him. Okay, so that was one of Yasser's first nice endgame wins against Arthur Bisguier. And it's sort of a rite of passage for American juniors in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s to beat Bisguier. Bisguier played in all kinds of open tournaments when he was in his 50s, 60s, and 70s. And these up-and-coming juniors who were 22, 23, 2400, they would beat him. And his rating got down to about 2220, even though he was like 2600 in the 60s. Because, you know, when you're in your 70s and 80s, the truth hurts. And I can back that up. In fact, my first two grandmasters I beat were in 1985, when I was 15. I don't remember which I beat first, but Bisguier was one of them, and the other one was Quinteros. And I almost showed you a game between Quinteros and Yasser, but I ruled against it because it wasn't good enough. I have high standards. Okay, game number 2, and this, no, go away. Get out of there. Oh yeah, I can make you go away. Okay, this is in 1979 against Bent Larsen. Yasser played Larsen several times in the 70s and 80s, and actually, there was more than one endgame win I could have shown you, but this is my favorite of his wins against Larsen. Larsen, of course, was one of the top 10 players in the world between 1965 and 1975. Now, this game was played in 79, and as you all know, except for one thing, in 1979, Larsen with the black pieces beat the reigning world champion Anatoly Karpov in Montreal 79, and I was at that game. Damn. I was 9 years old, and I saw Larsen beat Karpov with black, and he played a Scandi. Don't tell John Bartholomew. Wait, check that. Tell John Bartholomew. Okay, so Yasser just traded queens on f8, and this looks like there's not much material left. White doesn't have any passed pawns. Black has a passed pawn, but white has a big advantage. White has the 2 bishops, and black's king is on the back rank with his bishop on the back rank, so white has some extra options. Now, when Larsen allowed the trade of queens on f8, it looks like white has an immediate win, but Larsen's Larsen. He's not going to allow an immediate win. He's tricky. Okay, so the game went rook to b8, king g8, bishop b4. This looks like black is in a lot of trouble. Okay, because if black plays knight to d7, defending, we could play rook to d8, and black's pinned everywhere and attacked, and bishop here check is coming if you play knight d7. So knight d7 just loses. Okay, so first Larsen checks because Yasser always plays bishop f1, but now Yasser can't get his bishop to the diagonal because his bishop is pinned. And now if you play knight d7, you run into rook d8. And then you're not too happy. Okay, but Larsen didn't play knight d7. He played c5. And the idea is, if Yasser plays bishop c5, then you play knight d7. And now you know there were unturned tables, because the tables have turned. Probably this is a draw. Probably bishop takes, knight takes, bishop here. This is probably a draw, if I was a betting man. Okay, so Yasser obviously wants to win, so he plays bishop c3, and he's attacking the rook. And if he can take the knight on f6 and black plays g takes f, black has a lot of isolated pawns and Yasser has a better pawn structure. Yasser likes having better pawn structures in the endgame. Yasser likes to build and have small advantages and accrue the advantages even though he's playing one of the greatest players of all time, Bent Larsen. Larsen can't play rook a6 defending his knight because the bishop on f1 stops that. So he has to move his rook somewhere else. And then Yasser played king g2. Now Yasser's threatening bishop c4 check, which is very annoying because black has to resign then. So that is annoying when you have to resign. Can't play bishop c4 check here, even if I try to, because it's illegal. When I'm playing on the internet, I usually get a lot of questions. Why didn't you go here and why didn't you go there? And 90% of the time, the answer is it's illegal. I'm in check, or that piece is pinned. Okay, so Larsen played king f7, and if you play bishop c4 check, I can play king e7. Okay, and that's what happened. And now Yasser decided to make a big decision. He took the knight. You can't take with the king. If you do, you lose your bishop, so that's no good. Okay, so obviously white has a much better pawn structure, but probably many of you watching, including the people watching live, the people watching on YouTube, the people who are tapping into the broadcast somehow and watching electronically, hello FBI, you're probably thinking, Well, it's opposite colored bishops. Doesn't that mean it's a draw? Okay, and that's one of the biggest, misnomers in chess, is thinking opposite colored bishops means it's a draw. Now, if the rooks were off the board, this would be close to a draw. Still, white's much better because black has these weak pawns on the white squares. If white can capture them, he's going to win. So black still has some work to do with the rooks off. But that explains the next few moves when Yasser doesn't trade rooks, because with rooks on the board, and this is the Feingold rule, which probably is about as silly as the bishop opposite colored rule. If you have opposite colored bishops with rooks on the board, it's always winning. That's my rule. You're always winning if you have opposite colored bishops with rooks. Okay, it's not always winning, but I said it's always winning. So that's a rule you can follow and then ignore at your leisure. Okay. So Yasser played rook check. He wants to take the h7 pawn. Larsen says, hey, let's trade rooks. And Yasser said, no talking. Okay, he played rook b6. Notice the threat, rook e6 check, which will win at least one or two pawns of black's. So black played rook d6, rook b5, threatening the c pawn. How do you defend the c pawn? If you lose the c pawn, my rook is on your pawn, my bishop can attack your pawn. There's no way you can defend it. So he played rook c6, defending his pawn, because that's the only way to defend his pawn. And now rook b7 check wins the h pawn. That's very nice geometry. Okay. So he moved his king because it's a legal thing to do. And Yasser's a pawn up, and Yasser has a passed h pawn. And more importantly, these pawns are still weak. We could still try to win one of them. Rook b6. Larsen wants to play rook b4 and c4 and get his pawn going. Bishop d3, attacking the f pawn. The f pawn can't be saved. If you defend with your king, I have rook h5. So all your pawns are falling. So he gives up his f pawn, and he says, wait, Yasser says if I take the f pawn, he'll play c4 and c3 and so forth. So I'll just play rook h4, and I'll prevent c4, then I'll take the f pawn. If he defends the f pawn with his king, I'll play rook f4. So I'm stopping the c pawn, but I'm still winning the f pawn. King d5. Yasser takes the f pawn, so Larsen can move his c pawn. Rook d4 check. King defends the c pawn. Bishop e6. Rook b4 defending the pawn. King f3 moving the king into the center. Yasser has great endgame technique. That's what he's known for. c3. Now, trading rooks probably wins, probably. But why probably win when you can definitely win? He played rook to d8. He wants to play rook takes bishop with advantage. And he wants to play rook check and rook takes pawn. So c2 doesn't really work. So he played rook b6. He's attacking the bishop. And if rook c8 check, I'll play rook c6. And I'll keep pushing my pawn. Larsen's very tricky. Bishop f5, stopping the pawn and threatening the bishop on f8. Bishop e7, rook d7, bishop d6. h4, this pawn's hard to stop. This pawn's already stopped. So Yasser gets his pawn going. It's a many-step process. You take a couple of weak pawns, you stop the black c pawn, you push your own pawn. You have to do all of it. You can't just do one thing and win. Bent Larsen, world-class player, it's hard to beat them. Okay, rook b2, he wants to play c2. Yasser plays rook d8 and says, well, if you play c2, I'm going to go here and I'll win your pawn. So he stops c2. Also, the rook's better on d8 than d7 because when I queen, I stop bishop f8 and I stop rook b8. So this is good for queening my h-pawn. Okay, king c6. Larsen wants to play bishop c7 in case of rook c8 check. Then he can push his pawn. Yasser checks, forcing bishop c7. Then he decides he'll play rook f8, and he'll win the pawn on f6 with check. Now, Larsen played c2. If Larsen plays bishop e5, white can play h5, c2, bishop takes, h6, and h7 and h8 with advantage. Black's rook is too slow. Okay, so Larsen didn't do that. Larsen played c2, and they transposed into a rook and 4 versus rook and bishop endgame. And I don't know if Grandmaster Dmitry what? Komarov, yes. I can't remember his name usually. I don't know if he was alive in 1979. I'm guessing he was. And if he was, he would say 4 connected passed pawns, what else? And 4 connected passed pawns, the truth hurts. Okay, so Yasser plays g4. He's got 4 pawns, 1 for each of you. h5, and the pawns just keep pushing. Larsen makes a threat. King g2 defends the pawn. Here comes the h pawn. It's the famous Beatles song, Here Comes the H pawn. It's all right. King e6, h6, bishop f6, e4. Why did he play e4? He wants to play g5, but then his rook's hanging. So he played e4. Now his rook's not hanging. Now g5 is coming. King g3 breaking the pin. Maybe he'll play f4 because that's funny. Rook e2. Always play f3, keeping his 4 pawns. Bishop e5 check, which is a pretty bad mistake from Larsen. Larsen probably saw that it lost, but he was like, let's just get the game over with already. He was hoping for king h3, rook h2 mate, and black wins. It's never too late to blunder and lose. You can always do it. But Yasser took the bishop, and now if Larsen plays king takes rook, h7 makes a new queen. So after rook takes e5, Larsen resigned. So great endgame technique from Yasser. Now I didn't talk about this before, but this was played at Lone Pine. Lone Pine is a small, when I say small, I mean like it's this small. That's how small it is. It's a small town in California, has like 3 people. It's in the desert, nobody's there. And they used to have a super tournament there every year in the 70s. And it was an open tournament. It was open to players rated 2200 and above. And there were grandmasters from all over the world because first prize was either $10,000 or $15,000. And this was in 1979. So if you're doing the math, that's about $7 billion now. Okay, chess tournaments that were open to anybody didn't have $15,000 first. That didn't happen. That doesn't even happen now. Okay, and so all the best players in the world were playing in this small town that was taken over by chess once a year. And you might say, excuse me, I have a question. And then I call on you and you say, how is first prize 15,000? How'd they have so many prizes? Where'd the money come from? Good question. It came from famous person, Louis Statham and his wife. And they were rich and they liked chess. I think she liked chess more than he did. So they had chess tournament once a year. They sponsored it. And they wanted to have all the grandmasters come. And they did. So a lot of American junior players not only played in the World Open to get better, but they played in the Lone Pine tournament. Lone Pine was before my time. I was like 9 years old. So I wasn't anywhere near 2,200. Nowhere near. I'm near to 2,200 now. Okay, and that was a big tournament that a lot of strong grandmasters played in, basically through the 70s. And I believe you can buy a chess book, probably on Amazon, although it's probably out of print. It's called Lone Pine, and it talks about every Lone Pine, like 74, 75, 76. I don't know how many there were. There were about 10 of them. And, you know, it has cross tables and games with all the super GMs and such. Pretty interesting. Middle of nowhere. Okay, next game, Yasser's black against John Fedorowicz, and this was in the US Championship. So I'll flip the board. Okay, so black is going up, which makes some people very angry. Okay, you have to go to anger management if that makes you angry. Okay, the reason I put black at the bottom is Yasser was black. So I want you to have the feeling of winning. Like if white's on the bottom, white's getting crushed. Okay, so this is a rook and pawn endgame. It's white to move. Obviously, black is threatening rook takes e2 check. So the obvious move for white is king to f3. And I think John Fedorowicz and Yasser are about the same age. About the same age. Maybe Fedorowicz is a year older. Or maybe he's more than a year older. They're about the same age. And they grew up playing in US junior championships together and many US championships together. And they played on Olympiad teams together and world team championships. They were like that, son. So Yasser and Fed know each other pretty well. Now, you might think this is a draw because it's a rook and pawn ending. And even though black's up a pawn, it's this doubled isolated pawn. So how can that possibly matter? Well, it does matter because it takes white time to take those pawns. And while he's doing it, black can take this pawn on c4, which defends his a4 pawn. So Yasser played, obviously, rook e4. And now if white plays rook a5, rook takes c4, defends the a4 pawn, and threatens rook a3 check, and rook takes a3. Also of note, and I've taught this to all my students when I was teaching them endgames, you always want to move your king up in the endgame, and occasionally, both players have their king on the third or fourth rank. But in this position, Yasser has his king on the fourth rank, and Fedorowicz has his king on the third rank. So black's better just because of that. He's moved his king out more than white has. Okay, so Fedorowicz played rook b7. He said, I want this pawn, and I want to play rook f7 check, and your king undefends your rook. So Fedorowicz wants to do a lot. That move does a lot. Okay, rook takes c4. Rook takes g7. White tries to create an imbalance because he wants to take both of these pawns, but he wants to take this pawn first, so when he takes this pawn, he's behind the passed pawn. So rook c3 check. He played d5 instead of rook takes a3. I would have played rook takes a3 without thinking. And Yasser wants to play d4, which is very annoying. Okay, unless you have black, then it's great. Okay, so if rook takes a7, d4, rook e7, I take this, and I just win easily. I play rook takes pawn next move, and I win the king and pawn endgame. In fact, this pawn just queens. Man, I thought I just win with these two pawns, but I guess this pawn's queening. Okay, so d5 is a very accurate move from Yasser. King e2 was played unpinning his pawn, but moving his king back. Rook takes a3, g4 check, king to e5. Remember, it's never too late to lose. If you want to lose, you got no problem. You might say, wow, I moved my king up. I'm the greatest. And play king e4, and you get checkmated. Then you can show that to your friends. You can say, hey, I got checkmated in a rook and pawn ending when I was winning, with your king in the middle of the board. Okay, so he played king e5, not getting checkmated, and therefore best. Rook e7 check, forcing the king back. Rook takes. Passed pawns must be pushed. So he checked, so his pawn can move forward. And he's hoping for king d3 so he can play c4 check and move his pawn forward more. So he played king f3, so c4 doesn't gain a tempo. c4 anyway, we want our king to move up if they check us. And we want to make a queen. Making a queen's good. And you might say, I don't understand. If white takes this pawn, it's 3 against 3. Why would black win? Black wins because he has 2 pawns on the 5th rank, and you have 1 pawn on the 4th rank. So I'm queening 2 of my pawns quicker than you're queening 1. But he took anyway. c3, now black's threatening c2. So rook to h8, so you could play rook c8 check. a3, he's got 2 pawns, 1 for each of you. Now Yasser has 2 pawns on the 6th rank, and his opponent has 1 pawn on the 4th rank and 1 on the 2nd rank. So black is queening quicker than white is. White tried. Trying is the first step to failure. Rook a1, threatening a2, and if necessary, I'll play rook here, if necessary. Rook a8, a2. Now black is threatening rook check and a1 queen. White has to stop that, so white played king g2. If he plays king e2, we play the famous rook h1 trick. It's called the rook h1 trick. Then if you take the pawn, I skewer your king and rook. So you have to play king g2 to stop the rook h1 trick. Okay, and Yasser has 2 pawns, 1 for each of you. Rook b1, a brilliant move. Okay, if he plays c2, which also wins, then he has to win this endgame, which is more difficult. This ending, I think, should be a win, but it's going to take a while. Okay, but I think it should be a win. I don't believe in fortresses. Okay, but Yasser wins the game in 1 move. He plays rook b1. Yasser, the great endgame player. Notice Yasser's threatening the queen, which would win the game. So the obvious move for white is rook takes a2, then rook b2 check, and black makes a queen. Rook takes, pawn takes. And the important thing is to win by 1 tempo. If it was white's move, it would be a draw, but it's black's move. So it's not a draw. Now every move wins, but this wins the easiest. But okay, queen h7 is equally easy. So after rook b1, Fedorowicz resigned, and I think as a consequence, Yasser got to go to the inner zonal and play those super GM tournaments where they try to determine who the world champion is. And Fedorowicz did not. Fedorowicz was a great attacking player, but Yasser was always known as a great endgame player, and that's why one of the lectures I want to do, if not 2, are on Yasser's best endgames, where it's very smooth. Like, he's better, he's clearly better, he's winning, and he doesn't care how long it takes him. And that's a problem a lot of lower-rated players have, is they try to hurry. And he takes his advantages. He has passed pawns, so he pushes them. He has a more active king. He puts his king on the 4th rank. His opponent puts their king on the 2nd rank. And he pushes his passed pawns, even allowing white some passed pawns, because his pawns are much further advanced. So very nice technique from Yasser. Okay, and this is a surprising one, so I saved it to the end. This is against Lajos Portisch in 1983. And Yasser has white pieces, so now you guys are happy again. Those of you who were very unhappy black was on the bottom, now you're happy. Okay, so Yasser takes the rook, and you might say, boy, this looks like a draw. Okay, and I don't disagree with you. Okay, but white has an obvious advantage. White's rook is better than black's rook. And sometimes one advantage piggybacks off the other one. As a vegan, I try not to say that, so it's going to veggie back on it. Okay? You got to veggie back on the other ones. Sorry, veggies. Okay, so and the veggie back advantage is that black's king is no good. Why is black's king no good? Because white's rook is stopping it from moving and keeping it on the 1st rank. White's king, over the next 5 or 10 moves, could move up here, or it could move up this way. Okay, so white's king could move up, it's possible. Black's king is just stuck on the back row. Okay, and if black ever moves his rook, he loses his A pawn. But still, pawn structure is symmetrical. White doesn't have any mating threats. White isn't winning anything by force. So you would think it's probably a draw. Okay, and Lajos Portisch was probably like around his prime in the 70s and 80s. And probably 83, was that prime Yasser? That was 23-year-old Yasser. That's pretty good. 23-year-old Yasser is not his prime, but it's pretty good. Okay, and Portisch is probably, I think he was born in 31. So he's almost 20 years older than Yasser. Okay, so Portisch plays A5. So now Portisch can move his rook and get his rook out. Rook to B7. Now black has a problem here. In the game, he activated his rook because grandmasters know they have to activate their pieces. Rook A6, I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. Yeah, don't play rook A6. The rook is very badly placed there, and that's just looks like he's going to get in trouble pretty quickly. The move that looks obvious is B5. That looks obvious. Okay, but then white plays bishop D7, and you can't save your pawn. So you're losing a pawn one way or the other. So as Blondie would say, one way. Oh wait, that's a different thing. So black played rook to D8, and after rook takes pawn, played rook to D2. Black activated his rook, and black said, and Portisch, this was a quote Portisch gave in 1983. Portisch said, as Ben Feingold always says, always play bishop F1. I can't believe Portisch knew who I was. Also in 83, I never said that. I didn't know bishop F1 was a good move in 83. Okay, so Seirawan played B4 because Seirawan wants a passed pawn. And now Yasser did something that I think is befuddling to a lot of people. That's why he's a great endgame player. He plays unusual moves that are better than the usual move. I think everybody would take with the pawn because the pawn's on the 4th rank instead of the 3rd rank, and it's not this stupid side pawn. But actually, Yasser took with the rook. And the reason this is better is this pawn, the queening square is controlled by this bishop. So if black keeps his bishop on this diagonal, I have bishop E6, bishop D5, and I can escort my pawn, bishop B7, and my pawn can queen, and my bishop controls the queening square. Also, I gain a tempo on the bishop, and also, if you take with a pawn, it's hard to figure out how white advances further here. Like, what's white's plan? Not so easy. Okay, so rook takes b4 is probably better. Bishop f1. Yasser defends his pawn with bishop h3. And now it looks really difficult to win because it seems like white can't really get out of the bind on the king side. Like, white can't move his king, he can't move his bishop, he can't move his pawns. That's not good. So, what's going on? What happened? Okay. Oh, I see. Somehow an illegal move was made. Okay. So, after bishop h3, black played g5. Okay. It's never too late to get counterplay. h5, h4, bishop takes g2. Maybe black will win. Rook b1, get your bishop off of f1. I can't stand that. Bishop gets off of f1, and Yasser attacks the bishop, and then puts his rook behind the passed pawn. I always tell my students, put your rook behind the passed pawn, and my students say, no, I'm not doing that. And then my students don't win. And they scratch their head in a vain attempt to understand the situation. Okay, so obviously here comes this pawn. So he plays h5, he's getting counterplay. Bishop f5. I mean, letting him play h4 check and bishop e6 check, that's probably not good. Bishop f5 is a genius move because it gives the king h3 to hide on. Okay, now white's not stuck anymore, so white can play this. Black doesn't have any counterplay on the king's side that would stop that. Okay, so plays rook c1. I'm not sure why he didn't play a4. There has to be some tactical trick I'm not seeing. Oh, maybe black wants to play bishop c4 and rook f1. Oh, black wants to play bishop c4 and bishop f1. Always play bishop f1. That would be quite annoying, actually, now that I think of it. Man, that would suck. I want to give you a sample variation to show you how black's playing for the win. Check. And then white can't escape the perpetual. Black has a perpetual, and maybe black has more than a perpetual, although I doubt it. Although maybe rook f4, king g7. Oh, maybe. Wait a minute here. Actually, maybe, wow, king g7. If a7, I check, and here comes checkmate. And my favorite variation was if you play king h5, I take your bishop. Then if you go here, it's checkmate. Man, Portisch was tough. Even when he was losing, he tried to win. Okay, so Yasser saw that. After rook f2, he probably thought, why did Portisch play rook f2? Which is what I thought, but Yasser figured it out quicker. And he said, oh, he wants to play bishop c4 to f1. So he played rook to c1. And now you can't play bishop c4. Okay, bishop e8, stopping a4. Pinning the bishop. Bishop g6 check, forcing the rook and pawn endgame. And this ending is often a draw with the rook in front of the pawn, but because white's king can walk in, it's actually winning. And this is something I teach everybody, but this is a more complicated version because this isn't a setup puzzle. This is an actual game. This is real life. If my pawn gets to a7, I'm threatening rook g8 check. So you have to play king g7 or king h7 and just sit there. Okay, so he does that. That's what happens. Okay, now he threatens the g pawn. He takes the g pawn. Rook check. Now, the king has to go to h6. If the king goes to the first rank, doesn't matter where, I play rook b7, pawn a7, rook b8 check. I can almost pre-move, almost. You go here, I go here, and then I go rook check and I queen. So king h6 is forced. King takes f6. Rook takes h2. They're taking each other's pawns. Rook a8 threatens checkmate. Rook h8 checkmate. So Portisch play king h7 because that's all I can do. King takes g5, h3, rook here. And now, I'm sure Yasser saw this 10 moves ago. Okay, now, it's never too late to blunder. White has 4 legal moves here, but 2 of them don't win. If you move your king up in the endgame, like you were taught, rook check, rook takes pawn, rook here is going to be a draw. So he played king g2, and you might think, how the heck is Yasser going to win this? The answer is very funny. The answer is he played a7, and Portisch resigned. Now, if these pawns weren't on the board, it's a dead draw. It's the deadest draw ever. You can't ever win. Now, white has a winning plan here, which both players saw, and you can't stop it. It takes about 15 moves. Okay, but it's a very simple plan. I want to get my king near your pawn, which is illegal. I can't move my king up. And you're going to play king g7, king h7. But I can get my king up if I play king f2, king e2, king d2, king c2, king here. Now you have to leave your rook behind the pawn. You can't play like this because after rook here, I'm going to queen. So you have to keep your rook somewhere there. I don't know, here. King b3 here. Now we move up. Okay. And you play rook here, so my king can't go here, but now I play king b4 and you have to let me go there. So you do. And I don't know, you check and defend your pawn. Actually, no, that's a blunder because of king b6. So let's go here. King d5, check, king here, king here. This is the key position in the whole endgame. And then there's two more key positions. White has one move that wins here, although white could play a lot of moves to get back to this position and then win. He has to play king f5. Now, if the rook moves, I take your pawn. If the rook moves sideways, then everything wins. So you have to move your rook vertically. I take the pawn, and that's an easy win. If you play king h7, I finally win your pawn by playing king f6. And this is zugzwang. And for super grandmasters, that was really easy to see. All that stuff that you were going to do. That's the winning plan. And black is in zugzwang here. In fact, not only was it easy to see, I'm the one who saw it. I'm the one who decided to show you. No, it just said resigns, and I know why. So, okay, now, one thing that I teach is when you have this structure with a rook and a pawn and a rook behind it, if this pawn is on H or G, it's a draw. If it's anywhere else, it's a win. And E4 is anywhere else. It's not the H or G pawn. So white just moves his king out of the way and then pushes his pawn. It's a very simple plan. Push your pawn until it queens. And if you're like, you can't queen that pawn, I'm going to stop you. Okay, now white has two ways to win. Rook h8, and then rook here check. Or you could play e6 if you want to win. And then if king takes, we check, and we queen the pawn. And king and rook versus king is a win. And if you play king e7, I do the same thing. Rook h8, and rook takes. And super GMs know all of this and more, much more. I'm just showing you what I know. So in this position, you're taught don't play h7 here, or a7. Try to get your king in here, then move your rook out of the way, and win in 1,000 moves. That's what you're taught. But Yasser knew after a7 that winning plan couldn't be stopped. Portisch knew it couldn't be stopped, so Portisch resigned. And remember, you can never leave this file because the white rook moves and then we queen. So white's king goes here, and then here, and then here, and then here, and you're going to lose your e-pawn. So brilliant endgame from Yasser. I would say that was 4 brilliant endgames. And I'm not sure what we're going to do next week, but I want to thank Patrick Wheeler for sponsoring the lecture. He sponsored all 3 Yasser lectures. 3 Yassers, what else? And you can see Yasser today at the St. Louis Chess Club. He does commentary for every tournament, usually with somebody else. Yasser and somebody else. They change who the somebody else is quite often, but it's always Yasser. Yasser has a permanent job in St. Louis doing commentary for all their GM tournaments. I'm Grandmaster Ben Feingold. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next week with Yasser Seirawan Part 3. If you want to sponsor a lecture, contact my wife Karen at aclchessclub.com. Bye, everybody.